Hello again, welcome back to Lost My Thread. I'm Teresa and this is round 2 of the Battle of the Busty Button-Ups. Today we're going to be looking at the sewing. So I'm going to look at the construction, the instructions, how things come together, and which shirt gets the best finish. If this is your first time watching any of my Battle of the Busty Button-Up videos, I would definitely recommend catching up on the previous before coming back here. The first one, I told you about each of the shirts that I chose, what fabrics I paired with the shirts. The second one was the first round where I actually compared the PDF patterns and crowned a winner for that bit. Today is all about the sewing, so I'm going to look at the instructions in a bit more detail, show you some close-ups of the different elements of construction, what I thought was the easiest to put together, what I thought had the greatest sort of overall look at the end as well, and I will have to crown a winner for this round. I think it's going to be a little bit tricky. Before I get into too much technical detail, I want to talk about the overall instructions, what the quality was like for each of the patterns. The one that had the most lacking, I would say, that hurt my brain a little bit more and drove me a little bit crazy was the Birdie button-up blouse by Pattern Scout. So that is this shirt here. I'm not going to put these on today, that's for the next video, but you can at least just see what it looks like. I'm going to have some nice close-ups for later on, but if you just want to have an idea of how this shirt looks, it did turn out well in the end, but it was a bit of a journey to get here. This was the only pattern where I had parts of the instructions where I had to actually put it down, sleep on it, come back to the instructions the next day to try and figure out what they're trying to tell me. For this one, I felt like their instructions were pretty decent overall, but they felt a bit wordy at points. They had illustrations, very big illustrations, but that meant that sometimes there was a big illustration or multiple big illustrations for a few different steps in the instructions, and it was not always obvious which image was relating to which part of the instructions. I'll put some images up so that you can see what I'm talking about. Hopefully it makes a little bit of sense on the video, but overall, I've sewn a lot of patterns, I've gotten stuck at points, but this one did definitely have a little bit of extra sticking points than average, I would say. I also had the biggest emotional yo-yo with these particular instructions. When I downloaded the pattern, I was actually aware that there was a YouTube tutorial, so from the pattern designer, a sew-along, free to watch on YouTube, which was super exciting. I will say that there's nothing like that at all for the Miele shirt. The Harrison shirt, you can pay for a course to make shirts through Cashmerette, but obviously that's not going to be free. I'll put up the price of what that is because honestly off the top of my head I can't remember. But this one, it's free, it's on YouTube, anyone can watch it, and it's supposed to take you step by step about how to make this shirt. So I was so delighted. I felt like I could probably end the whole competition. This round was going to go straight to this shirt until I watched the video. So there's nothing like really wrong with the video in and of itself, honestly. It's great, it's informative, it's clear, it makes sense. But what drove me really crazy is that it's put together in a really different way from how the pattern instructions are, so the instruction booklet for this shirt. If you've made a few garments before, you will probably find that a lot of similar elements can be put together in really different ways. Sometimes it's simpler, sometimes it has a better finish, and that's basically what this whole video is about today, comparing the different elements. So to have instructions on the video that don't match the written instructions, basically it's just a new set of instructions. And I wanted to go with what the pattern comes as. If you're not going to watch the videos, if you're not going to seek that out, I wanted to go by what you get from the sewing pattern. And unfortunately, it was a different order of operations, different technique to bring these bits together. I probably prefer the construction technique from the video, to be honest. If I followed that, I would have probably had a lot less headache and enjoyed the whole process a bit more. But when I'm looking at what I get in the written instructions, it was hard going at times. In the complete opposite end of the spectrum was the Miele shirt by Itch to Stitch. This one had my favorite overall instruction layout, the way they're wording things, the way they illustrate things. I absolutely loved their general sort of instruction booklet and how they put it all together. Their instructions were always to the point, just what you needed to know, nothing more, nothing less. They had each step illustrated really clearly, sectioned out, so there was no guesswork about what illustration was supposed to go with what pattern. I felt like they'd seen the other pattern and were like, no, 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 we're not gonna do it like that. We're gonna do the opposite. I know that's not true because this shirt pattern came out before the other, but the point is it was honestly like black and white, complete opposites, and I really loved the way they did it with Itch to Stitch. And then the Harrison shirt by Cashmerette was probably somewhere between the two as far as the overall instructions. So this one did come together really nicely and really neatly in the end, but the instructions just weren't as much to my liking as the Itch to Stitch one. What I would say is they did have, again, really nice, clear, easy to follow instructions, not overly wordy, telling you just what you needed to know. The main difference is that they also had some instructions where there were multiple bits of instruction with multiple different images, and sometimes my brain was just taking an extra minute to go, wait, what, that picture is supposed to be for what part of the instruction again? And look, with most sewing patterns, I have my moments, so it's not like I had to put it away and step away, but I did just have to read it a few times to really understand what they were saying, look at those illustrations multiple times to get what they were trying to tell me. But it came together really well, and it wasn't anything that was super stressful. It just made me think a little bit harder before being able to just kind of leap into it like I could with the Miele shirt. However, the Harrison shirt had one element that the other ones did not have that I always love. When you are cutting out your pattern pieces, they are numbered. So it will be number 7 is the placket, number 8 is the cuff, you know, these kinds of numbers. And when they show you the construction of how to put these pieces together in the Harrison shirt, they are numbered in just the same way. So you can see that you want this 5 piece to match up to the number 6 piece, because sometimes a lot of these pieces can look really similar and it can be a bit confusing to know what you're trying to join up to what. So I was really happy to see that. That's something that I've seen a lot more in the big 4 than in indie patterns, but this was really great to have as an extra just reassurance that I definitely had the right pieces and I was definitely joining them up in just the way that I was supposed to. Big fan of that. Now I'm going to work kind of top down from the shirts, looking at some specific areas of construction, starting with the collar, which is kind of make or break for a shirt, one of the first things you see when you're looking at a shirt. The Miele shirt and the Harrison shirt had pretty similar ways of putting these together, and they both came together pretty well. I'm pretty pleased overall with the finish of both of those. The Miele shirt, I never, even now, have worked out what they were trying to tell me to do with the construction of this collar. Notes on a postcard, please. I looked at this so many times. That was one of the times when I looked at the video to find that they did it in a completely different way that made a lot more sense. I don't know what I was supposed to be doing here. I could never quite figure out what they were telling me, but I managed to just basically figure out my own technique, which ended up being very similar to the other shirts, and it came together okay. It's not the neatest finish on this one. It's not as good as the others, but you know what? Considering I was completely clueless with what I was supposed to be doing, I'm gonna call it a win. When you are putting a sleeve into a sleeve head, attaching a sleeve to the top of a shoulder seam, many of you will know there are 2 basic ways to do that. One is that you can have everything kind of flat pieces that you're joining together. So you might have like a big sleeve piece and you will have a bodice that you've attached at the shoulder seam but nowhere else, and you are just going to be lining those edges up together, curving it to manipulate it to fit it if you need to, and then stitching along there with like a big long wide stitch. The other way would be what I would think of as calling like setting it in the round. So what you're going to be doing is making a whole sleeve that is stitched together at the bottom edge of the sleeve. You will be making a whole bodice that's stitched together at the shoulders, stitched together at the side seam as well. Flip the bodice inside out and put the sleeve inside so that right sides are facing. So you're basically going to be joining up all around that circular edge and stitching along there. I think set-in sleeves like this are something that can catch a lot of people out, drive a lot of people a little bit bonkers. I don't really mind doing them. I think there's something that I've been doing since the very beginning of my sewing, so it's one of those things, and I can usually ease them in pretty reasonably well. All these instructions tell you to make a couple of rows of basting stitches in the edge of the sleeve to make sure that you can kind of curve it and shape it to fit inside the sleeve head like it's meant to. So from that point of view, I don't generally find this to be such a tricky thing to put together, but my preference is to set it in that round, so the second way that I described. I feel like I can just get it all kind of lined up a bit easier when it's all curving the way that it's meant to in the end, and I just feel like it comes together better for me. I think on the whole, for that reason, the Miele shirt is to me the neatest sleeve head. It came together the nicest. It's the least awkward and bulky. The Harrison shirt was also in the flat, but it did come together pretty well. I think it's, from what you can see probably in pictures, it probably looks equally good. I feel like it's not quite as neat of a finish, but certainly like really good. It did come out overall really well. The Birdie button-up blouse, that one, I felt like there's got to be something going on with the pieces and how it's supposed to go together, that it's just not quite the right shape, not quite the right size. I think it's got to be in the drafting, because I had about 3 different points where I had to unpick some stitches and redo them because I was getting lots of little puckers along the seam edge. When I watched the video, the same thing happened to the pattern designer. She had to unpick stitches because she had little puckers there and restitch them. And yeah, you can kind of fuss around and get a decent finish in the end, but I feel like it doesn't need to be that hard. It was not that hard with the other patterns. And I did, in the end, end up leaving some of like tinier puckers in there because I just gave up. To be honest, I just didn't care. And I felt like with this particular fabric, it kind of hides a multitude of sins. But overall, it just did not go in as neatly in that one. My favorite construction for the sleeve was the Miele. Least favorite was the Birdie button-up blouse. Harrison somewhere in the middle. One of the reasons I chose these specific button-up shirt patterns is because they all had different ways of shaping in the bust area. I thought it'd be interesting to see what the overall outcome is from using the different methods. They all work really fine, and I don't really mind as far as constructing them. So the Birdie button-up blouse had sort of classic darts coming out from the side. The Miele shirt had some gathers sort of in the top of the yoke, so that you had a bit of fullness there underneath the yoke. And there were princess seams in the Harrison shirt. They're all fine, like I said, to put together. I think I do have a little special love for the princess seams. I feel like they're like a kind of geometric genius when you're putting them together, because you're creating like a 3D curve as you're stitching these things together. And it often feels like these pieces are not really gonna fit because they seem really different dimensions. And then it's the one that I would say looks like it's got the most bust shaping when it's just hanging on the hanger. And I think it's just really clever and really cool to shape with that kind of a seam. As far as the button placement itself, I thought it was interesting that they all had slightly different distance between the buttons and different ways of putting them on. So the Harrison shirt and the Miele shirt both asked you to look at the apex of your bust, so the fullest part of your bust, and make sure that you place a button there, which is what I will always do. I'm never going to just stick buttons on a shirt any old how, because if you don't put them at the fullest part of your bust, you can guarantee that you're going to have that gaping open in the middle. So it's always going to be a good idea to start with one button there, but then even beyond that point, they have different ways of putting it together. So the Miele shirt tells you to put one right at the apex of your bust, and then you're supposed to be measuring 2.5 inches up and 2.5 inches down to place the other buttons on their button placket. When I put those on, I felt like it didn't look like there was enough in that space. So I ended up putting another one above. So I have sort of basically 4. So my apex is kind of the 3rd one down rather than the 2nd one down. I don't think I have a particularly low full bust, so, you know, it's just the pattern design, I guess. But I will say, when you look at the illustration of the Miele shirt, or sorry, the photographs from their kind of photo shoot, I did see that the middle button is actually above the apex of that person's bust. So clearly, where they're telling you that the buttons are meant to be doesn't quite match up where a normal bust apex is probably going to be. So use that instruction with a pinch of salt, I would say. And then there was a very similar thing for me with the Harrison shirt. So they have an actual, like a pattern piece when you're cutting out, that's your button placement guide. And you're supposed to put the 3rd button at the fullest part of your bust, at the bust apex. And then that's how you know where you're gonna place the other ones. When I put it there, I felt like, again, there was going to be too big of a gap above the top button and the actual collar. So I ended up making it the 4th button at the fullest part of my bust. And that ends up looking, I think, really good. I think that worked really well for me. Theirs are a lot closer together. So the Miele, I say a lot, it feels like a lot when you're comparing them side by side. The Miele shirt was 2.5 inches apart. This one, they end up being 2.25 inches apart, which, like I said, doesn't make a huge difference overall, but it does look like a lot of buttons on there. And I'm not entirely sure that you need to have that many buttons. Maybe that's what's gonna hold this one together better than the others, but I feel like if it fits you well everywhere, it shouldn't really be pulling, so you shouldn't really get that gaping anyway. We'll see when I'm actually putting it on and moving around in it, and I will report back to you when I see how exposed I feel in any of these shirts. One slightly peculiar side note, when I was making the Harrison shirt, they have circular shapes for where you're meant to be putting your buttons for your buttonhole placement. There are no lines. So normally for buttonhole placement, or commonly for buttonhole placement, you're gonna have either just a starting point with a little line going up, or a hole kind of like a capital I shape to show you this is where you want the buttonhole to be. Theirs was just a circle, and they didn't tell you anything in the instructions about which way round, which orientation to have the different buttonholes. So for some reason, my brain kind of went out the window, and when I was making this shirt, I stitched the buttonholes horizontal instead of vertical. And I don't know why I did that. I know shirt buttons usually go up and down vertically. I don't think it makes a big difference, and this is one of the times where I make a mistake and I'm just going with, yeah, that was, that's just the design that I've chosen for this shirt. I'm going with that one. I'm owning that decision, but I felt like they could have just told me. And I wonder if other people have made that mistake, because it's just, you have a moment, you're just going along doing your buttonholes. You're not really necessarily using your brain at that point too much. And maybe I should have used my brain a little more. For the Birdie button-up blouse, there was nothing in the instructions about where to place the buttons apart from the actual markings on the pattern piece, which is the case with a lot of sewing patterns, to be honest. So they have got them on the pattern piece that you're meant to transfer onto the shirt when you're first cutting it out, and you just go with where they tell you and I guess kind of hope for the best. Now, I was not going to go with that. I wanted to make sure that I had a button at the fullest part of my bust, otherwise there's no point in me making a shirt if I'm going to be, popping out of it. There's no point. So I did put that shirt on, put a pin in, and compared it to the original pattern piece. And funnily enough, it was at the apex of my bust, one of them. So it worked out. If I hadn't double checked, I would have been lucky and gotten away with it. But not everyone's going to be so lucky. So just to mention that for me, it worked out, but it wouldn't always for everybody. And then this one also had the biggest gap between the buttons. So it was 2 3/4 of an inch between each button, 2 1/2 inch distance on the Miele shirt, and 2 1/4 inch on the Harrison shirt. So it's just a 1/4 inch difference for each. I'll be really interested to see what difference it makes in the end. So watch the next video and I will let you know how I got on with those. I thought the sleeve plackets were pretty interesting because they were constructed in quite different ways. So the sleeve placket is the area where you're kind of going to have this bit where you can open the sleeve out when you unbutton the cuff, that the actual sleeve itself is open. So you're going to have a separation there. You're going to need to cut into the fabric to be able to open that out. For the Miele shirt, you ended up creating, it was kind of like a bias binding, basically like a binding strip, these little strips of fabric that you stitched into either side of that snipped edge, and then you kind of folded them over themselves, folded them back to create this little origami type situation. I feel like this one looks the least neat in the end. I feel like it's really difficult to be able to get the top of that point sitting flat when you're pulling fabric in and then folding it over itself. It's just a little bit more bulky. It's not quite as slick, I would say, for that one. The other two, the Harrison shirt and the Birdie button-up blouse, were actually really pretty similar. The main difference is the Harrison shirt has a little point at the top of the button placket, whereas the Birdie button-up blouse, it's more of a straight line, and I don't really have a preference for that. I think that's just a slightly different style. The last bit I'm going to talk about, which is the bottom part of the shirt, is the hem. I didn't really expect this to be an interesting thing to mention. I figured they were all going to be basically the same, just folding up and folding up again to construct the hem. But I did have a preference, surprisingly. So the Harrison shirt was the one that I felt like I had the least neat hem in the end. So this is pretty curved. Hopefully you can see there's a lot of curving going on at the side, a lot of curve going on at the front and the back as well. And this one had a bit of a thicker hem than the others. So they had you fold it up a 1/4 inch and then fold it up another 1/2 inch and stitch it along the edge there. But because it's quite curved and because you're having to go a sort of fairly decent distance where you're folding it up, the bit that's on the bottom edge that you're folding up is going to be wider than the bit that you're trying to fold it into. So I really couldn't get a very neat edge. Even some of the outside is slightly puckery. The inside is definitely not perfect. And I felt like I wanted to go with what they're saying. I don't want to try and mess around and do my own instructions because I'm really making a point to do what they are telling me to do to see which one I like the look of the best. But this one did definitely end up the messiest along the hem. The Birdie button-up blouse does what a lot of patterns will tell you to do. So you're just going to be making a little very small tiny hem, where you fold up the bottom edge of the hem a 1/4 inch and press it, fold it up another 1/4 inch and press it so that you're sure that that raw edge is now enclosed, and then you just stitch neatly along the edge there. And that came out really well. The only thing I will say is I didn't bother pressing. I don't generally bother pressing when I'm folding up such small amounts, because I can guarantee you I will burn the heck out of my fingers, and I don't feel like it actually makes a difference for me to have pressed it. So I just almost kind of roll it as I'm going, and that seems to work well for me. Now the Miele shirt went kind of above and beyond with their hem instructions. They gave you 3 different ways to construct the hem. Maybe some people would think that's too much, but I really like that they gave you options depending on what tools you have on hand, what kind of finish you really want to go for, how much you want to faff around with it, how much experience you have, and I really appreciated that personally. So the first way that they showed you could do it is by using a rolled hemming foot on your sewing machine. So this is something that goes onto your machine. It's a foot that you put onto the machine that's basically going to do what I was describing I did with the Birdie button-up blouse. So you insert the fabric, kind of curling it around itself, and the foot itself curls your fabric over and over again, and then is meant to just stitch along the edge. So it basically just does the hard work for you. But I've never been very successful in using this foot before. I do plan to try again. I'm not giving up on it, but I thought I'd give it a go for the shirt. You never know. They're telling me clearly how to do it. They think I can do it. If they think I can do it, why shouldn't I be able to do it, right? So I decided to go ahead and have a go with using my rolled hemming foot, and it did not work very well for me. So one of the things I would say is that you do need to kind of coax it along and start to kind of make sure the fabric is curving in and folding at the right width where it's meant to. And I kind of felt like by that point I might as well have just been doing what I did with my Birdie button-up blouse. The other thing is when you get to anywhere that it's a bit more curved or that's a bit more bulky, it's difficult to keep a nice sort of straight seam there because it's either pulling in too much of the fabric or not enough of the fabric. So on this shirt, you have a curve, you know, similar to all the shirts, to be honest with you. You've got a little curve at the side seam, you've got a curve at the front and at the back. So to maintain the same amount of fabric going into that rolled hemming foot was really difficult depending on where you were on the shirt, and I ended up getting about a 1/4 of it done before it just decided it looked like a mess. I was not having fun doing it. It was stressing me out, and I just stopped, unpicked the whole thing, and put it together in basically what I did for the Birdie button-up blouse, which is the 3rd way that they tell you you can do it with the Miele shirt. What I will say is the Miele shirt doesn't tell you to press it, so I was like, yes. You are doing exactly what I would do. You are telling me to do the things that I'm instinctively wanting to do anyway. So I like that they told me to basically fold and fold again as I'm stitching rather than going and pressing it beforehand, which I think is probably not terribly useful. The other way that they tell you can do it is by using a serger, so just stitching along the edge, making a serged edge along the bottom of the whole shirt, and then using the edge of your serger thread to fold up from and then just stitch along on there, which would definitely work absolutely fine, but I prefer the finish of having everything completely enclosed, so I prefer to do it the way that I did. Now I have to be honest, picking a winner for this particular round was really not easy. When I looked at each of the specific categories, looking to see, right, well, which one did I like best for sleeve placket? Which one did I like best for the collar? Which one did I like best for the hem? You know, comparing each of these like for like, I ended up with a complete tie between the Miele shirt and the Harrison shirt, which is probably not too much of a surprise because you've been hearing me going on about both of those 2 shirts in particular, really enjoying putting these 2 together. And I really did honestly love making both of these shirts. So that just made it even harder to pick a winner. So I decided to kind of take a step back and look at these shirts overall, how happy I was with the finished article for each of these, and decided that I'm going to go ahead and say the winner for this round is the Harrison shirt by Cashmerette. And that really just came down to the finish. It was a lot more slick, a lot more professional and neat overall. Yes, there were elements I preferred from the Miele shirt, but on the whole, I felt like I ended up with a better shirt with the Harrison shirt and really enjoyed the process along the way. What a journey I have been on with these shirts, I am telling you. So I hope you have enjoyed the journey as well and hearing all about why I chose the winner today. Next time is pretty exciting. I am actually going to put these shirts on, and I will show you what I like about the shape, the fit, the style, and crown the overall winner of the Battle of the Busty Button-Ups. You do not want to miss that one. Make sure you are subscribed to my channel if you're not already. I hope that you've enjoyed this video today. If you did, I want to know about it. Leave me a comment down below. Give me a thumbs up if you like what you see, and I will see you guys soon. I'm hoping the next one should be sooner rather than later. Just got to get my final thoughts on these shirts, some nice pictures of them as well, and I will see you soon. Bye!